Millionaire is challenged to marry a McDonald's waitress. He's surprised and falls in tears when something happens. Alexander Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, gazing out at the San Francisco skyline. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the city, painting the glass and steel structures in warm hues. At 35, he was the youngest CEO in the history of quantum innovations, a tech giant that had revolutionized the industry with its cutting-edge AI and robotics advancements. He adjusted his perfectly tailored Armani suit and checked his Rolex. It was time to meet his friends for their monthly get-together. A smirk played on his lips as he thought about how far he'd come from his humble beginnings. Now, he could buy and sell most of the people he knew without breaking a sweat. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, his phone buzzed with notifications. Another successful quarter, another round of layoffs to boost profits. It was just business, he told himself. Sentiment had no place in the corporate world. His Ferrari purred to life as he slid into the driver's seat. The usual meeting spot was some upscale restaurant or exclusive club, but tonight was different. His friend Marcus had insisted on meeting at a McDonald's of all places. Alexander scoffed at the idea, but agreed, curious about what Marcus was up to. He pulled into the parking lot, wrinkling his nose at the smell of grease and salt that assaulted him as soon as he stepped out of his car. Inside, he spotted Marcus and their other friends, all successful businessmen and women, looking comically out of place in their designer clothes amidst the plastic tables and screaming children. "Alex, over here!" Marcus waved, a mischievous glint in his eye. Alexander made his way over, nodding curtly to the others. "This better be good, Marcus. I haven't set foot in a place like this since college." Marcus grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, it's good? We've got a little proposition for you, my friend." Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "I'm listening." "We've been talking," Marcus began, gesturing to the group, "and we've come to the conclusion that you, my dear Alex, have lost touch with reality." "Excuse me?" Alexander's voice was sharp, his eyes narrowing. "Come on, Alex. When was the last time you did anything that wasn't about status or money? When was the last time you connected with someone who wasn't in our circle?" Marcus challenged. The others nodded in agreement, and Alexander felt a flicker of annoyance. "I don't see how that's any of your business. I'm successful. Isn't that the point?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "The point, Alex, is that you've become predictable, boring even. We think it's time for you to prove you've still got what it takes to surprise us." Alexander's competitive nature flared. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A challenge," Marcus said, his eyes gleaming. "We want you to marry someone completely outside our world, someone ordinary, someone you'd never look twice at normally, and you have to make them fall for you for real, not just for your money." The table fell silent, all eyes on Alexander. He felt a mix of indignation and excitement course through him. "And if I do? If you can pull it off within a year, we'll each contribute to a fund for a charity of your choice. If you fail, you step down as CEO of Quantum Innovations." Alexander's mind raced. The stakes were high, but the thought of backing down from a challenge was unthinkable. Plus, he was confident in his abilities. He'd never failed to get what he wanted before. "Fine," he said, his voice cool and controlled. "I accept, but I choose the person." Marcus nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. "Of course. In fact, why don't you start right now? Choose someone in this very restaurant." Alexander's gaze swept the room, taking in the families, the teenagers, the elderly couples. His eyes landed on a young woman behind the counter. She looked to be in her late 20s, with mousy brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of long nights and early mornings. There was nothing remarkable about her, nothing that would usually catch his attention. "Perfect. Her," he said, nodding towards the counter. "The waitress." Marcus followed his gaze and grinned. "Excellent choice. Let the games begin." As his friends laughed and clinked their paper cups together, Alexander studied the waitress more closely. She moved with efficiency, her smile tired but genuine as she dealt with customers. He watched as she bent down to speak to a little girl, her face softening with warmth. For a brief moment, Alexander felt a twinge of something unfamiliar. Guilt, uncertainty. He pushed it aside. This was just another deal, another challenge to conquer. He'd wine and dine her, sweep her off her feet, and be married within the year. How hard could it be? Little did he know that this wager would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, success, and the true meaning of happiness. As the evening wore on, Alexander found himself stealing glances at the waitress. She seemed to be nearing the end of her shift, looking more exhausted by the minute. He decided to make his move. Approaching the counter, he flashed his most charming smile. "Excuse me, miss. I couldn't help but notice how hard you've been working. I was wondering if I could buy you a coffee when you're done with your shift." The waitress looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. She studied him for a moment, taking in his expensive suit and confident demeanor. Then, to Alexander's shock, she shook her head. "Thanks, but no thanks," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I've got to get home to my daughter." Alexander blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. He wasn't used to being turned down. "I understand, maybe another time." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested. Have a good night, sir." As she turned away to help another customer, Alexander stood there feeling oddly deflated. He returned to his friends, who had watched the exchange with barely concealed amusement. "Struck out already, Alex?" Marcus teased. "Maybe this challenge will be more interesting than we thought." Alexander straightened his shoulders, his determination returning. "Hardly. This is just the beginning. I never lose, Marcus. Remember that." As they left the McDonald's, Alexander's mind was already working on his next move. He'd never backed down from a challenge before, and he wasn't about to start now. The waitress might have resisted his charm tonight, but he was far from defeated. What Alexander didn't realize was that this seemingly simple wager was about to lead him down a path he never expected. The journey ahead would test not just his ability to win a bet, but the very foundations of who he thought he was and what he valued in life. As he drove home in his luxury car, the image of the tired waitress and her genuine smile to the little girl lingered in his mind. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one that both intrigued and unsettled him. Little did he know, this was just the first crack in the carefully constructed facade of his life, a tiny fissure that would soon begin to spread, challenging everything he thought he knew about success, love, and true fulfillment. The following morning, Alexander Blackwood strode into the Quantum Innovations headquarters with his usual air of confidence. As he made his way to his office, employees scurried out of his path, their faces a mixture of respect and fear. He had cultivated this atmosphere deliberately. In his mind, it was the mark of a strong leader. But today, something felt off. The memory of the waitress's rejection lingered, an unfamiliar itch he couldn't quite scratch. As he settled behind his desk, his assistant, Sarah, entered with his schedule for the day. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "You have a board meeting at 10, followed by—" Alexander waved her off. "Cancel everything after 2 p.m. I have a personal matter to attend to." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly, but she knew better than to question him. "Of course, sir. Anything else?" He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Sarah, do you know the name of that McDonald's on 5th and Market?" If Sarah was surprised by the question, she didn't show it. "I believe it's called McBurgers, sir. It's a local franchise." "Thank you, Sarah. That'll be all." As soon as she left, Alexander pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus. "Well, well," Marcus answered, his voice thick with amusement. "Calling to forfeit already?" Alexander scoffed. "Hardly. I need information on our little wager. The waitress, I want to know everything about her." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Now, Alex, that wouldn't be playing fair, would it? Part of the challenge is getting to know her yourself." "No shortcuts." Alexander gritted his teeth. "Fine, but I need a name at least. How am I supposed to pursue her if I don't even know what to call her?" Marcus chuckled. "Fair enough. Her name tag said Emily. That's all you're getting from me. Good luck, my friend. You're going to need it." The line went dead, leaving Alexander staring at his phone in frustration. "Emily, It was a start, at least. For the rest of the morning, Alexander found it difficult to concentrate on work. His mind kept drifting to Emily, wondering about her life, her daughter. What made her tick? It was an unusual feeling for him. He rarely thought about others, unless it directly benefited him. As 2 p.m. approached, he left the office, ignoring the surprised looks from his employees. He hadn't left work early in years. The Ferrari purred to life as he headed towards McBurger's. He felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness that he hadn't experienced since his early days of building the company. It was exhilarating. He parked across the street from the restaurant, watching the entrance. An hour passed, then 2. Just as he was about to give up, he saw her. Emily emerged from the side entrance, her work uniform replaced by simple jeans and a t-shirt. She looked tired, but somehow more relaxed than the night before. Alexander got out of his car, his heart racing unexpectedly. He watched as Emily walked to a nearby bus stop, then made his move. "Emily!" he called out, approaching her with what he hoped was a friendly smile. She turned, her eyes widening in recognition. "Oh, it's you again." "I'm Alexander," he said, extending his hand. "I apologize if I came on too strong last night. I was hoping we could start over." Emily hesitated, then shook his hand briefly. "Look, Alexander, I appreciate the gesture, but I meant what I said. I'm not interested in our coffee," he interrupted. "Just coffee. As friends. I'm new to this part of town and could use someone to show me around." It was a lie, of course, but Alexander was used to bending the truth to get what he wanted. He watched as Emily's expression softened slightly. "I don't know," she began. "Please," Alexander said, injecting a note of vulnerability into his voice. "I know it sounds strange, but I don't have many real friends in this city. Everyone I know is, well, it's all business." Emily studied him for a long moment, and Alexander felt oddly exposed under her gaze. Finally, she sighed. "One coffee," she said. "But I need to pick up my daughter from the sitter first." Alexander nodded, trying to hide his triumph. "Of course. May I give you a ride?" Emily glanced at his Ferrari and shook her head. "No, thanks. I'll take the bus. Meet me at the coffee shop on the corner of Pine and Hyde in an hour." As she boarded the arriving bus, Alexander felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite identify. He'd gotten what he wanted, a chance to get closer to Emily. But something about the interaction left him feeling unsettled. An hour later, Alexander found himself sitting in a small, cozy coffee shop that was a far cry from his usual upscale haunts. He felt out of place in his designer suit, surrounded by students and young professionals in casual wear. The bell above the door chimed, and Emily walked in, holding the hand of a little girl who looked to be about 5 years old. The child had her mother's warm brown eyes and a mop of curly hair that bounced as she walked. "Hi," Emily said, approaching his table. "This is my daughter, Lily. Lily, say hello to Mr. Alexander." "Hello, Mr. Alexander," Lily said shyly, half hiding behind her mother's leg. Alexander felt a strange tightness in his chest. He'd never been particularly fond of children, but something about Lily's innocent gaze made him want to smile. "Hello, Lily," he said softly. "It's very nice to meet you." As they sat down, Alexander noticed the way Emily's eyes constantly darted to her daughter, checking on her, making sure she was comfortable. It was a kind of attentiveness he wasn't used to seeing. "So," Emily said, after they'd ordered their drinks, "you said you're new to this part of town?" Alexander nodded, scrambling to maintain his lie. "Yes, I recently moved here for work. It's been an adjustment." "What do you do?" Emily asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. For a moment, Alexander considered telling the truth, but the thought of revealing his true identity felt somehow wrong in this context. "I work in tech," he said vaguely. "Nothing too exciting. What about you? How long have you been at McBurger's?" Emily's face tightened slightly. "About a year now. It's not my dream job, but it pays the bills and gives me time with Lily." "What is your dream job?" Alexander found himself asking, surprised by his own interest. A soft smile played on Emily's lips. "I've always wanted to be a teacher. I was studying education before." She trailed off, glancing at Lily, who was happily coloring on a napkin. Alexander felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Was it sympathy? He pushed it aside. "Why didn't you finish?" Emily shrugged, her eyes distant. "Life happened. The factory where I worked closed down suddenly, and then I found out I was pregnant with Lily. Her father wasn't in the picture, so I had to make some tough choices." As Emily spoke, Alexander felt a growing unease. The factory closure sounded suspiciously like one of the cost-cutting measures his company had implemented a few years back. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on Emily's story. "But you haven't given up on that dream?" he asked. Emily's eyes lit up. "No, never. Someday, when Lily's older and things are more stable. I'd love to go back to school." As they continued to talk, Alexander found himself genuinely engrossed in Emily's life, her struggles, her dreams, her unwavering love for her daughter. It was all so far removed from his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. Before he knew it, 2 hours had passed. Lily had fallen asleep in her chair, her little head resting on Emily's arm. "I should get her home," Emily said softly, gathering her things. Alexander nodded, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. "Of course. Thank you for meeting me, Emily. I enjoyed our conversation." Emily gave him a small smile. "It was surprisingly nice. Thank you for the coffee, Alexander." As he watched Emily leave, carrying a sleeping Lily in her arms, Alexander felt a strange mix of emotions. He'd made progress in his pursuit, yes, but something else had happened too, something he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, Alexander Blackwood had engaged in a conversation where he wasn't thinking about what he could gain from it. And as he walked back to his car, he realized that the unfamiliar feeling in his chest wasn't triumph over a successful step in his plan. It was the beginning of something much more complicated. The following week saw Alexander Blackwood's life take an unexpected turn. His usually regimented schedule now revolved around finding opportunities to accidentally run into Emily. He found himself frequenting McBurger's more often than he ever thought possible, each visit an exercise in restraint as he tried to maintain his facade of being just another everyday customer. Today, he sat in a corner booth, nursing a coffee he didn't really want, his eyes fixed on Emily as she moved efficiently behind the counter. He'd learned her schedule by heart. She worked the morning shift on weekdays, allowing her to be home when Lily returned from school. As he watched her interact with customers, her tired smile never wavering, Alexander felt a twinge of something. Admiration. Guilt. He couldn't quite place it. "Refill, sir." Emily's voice startled him out of his reverie. "Oh, yes. Thank you, Emily," he said, trying to sound casual. She poured the coffee, then hesitated. "You know, Alexander, if you wanted to talk, you could just ask. No need to pretend you suddenly love fast food coffee." Alexander felt his face heat up, an unfamiliar sensation. I'm that obvious, huh?" Emily's lips quirked into a small smile. "Just a bit. Look, my break's in 10 minutes. If you want to chat, meet me out back." As she walked away, Alexander felt a mix of triumph and trepidation. He'd been trying to get closer to Emily for weeks, but now that the opportunity presented itself, he felt strangely nervous. 10 minutes later, he found himself in the alley behind McBurger's. Emily was already there, leaning against the wall, her work cap off and her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. "So," she said, crossing her arms, "what's this all about, Alexander? Why are you really here?" Alexander opened his mouth, ready to spin another lie, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the directness of Emily's gaze, or the weariness he saw behind her eyes. Whatever it was, he found himself saying, "I like talking to you." Emily raised an eyebrow. "That's it. You've been coming here almost every day for weeks just to talk to me." "Well, when you put it like that, it does sound a bit intense," Alexander admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. It's just talking to you that day in the coffee shop. It was the first real conversation I'd had in I don't know how long." Emily's expression softened slightly. "What do you mean?" Alexander sighed, leaning against the opposite wall. "My life. It's all about business, meetings, deals, profit margins. I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that wasn't about money or status. That sounds lonely, Emily said softly. The word hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. Lonely, was that what he was? He'd never thought of it that way before. He had everything he'd ever wanted. Money, power, success. How could he be lonely? I guess it is, he admitted, the realization dawning on him even as he spoke the words. Emily studied him for a moment, then shook her head with a small laugh. You know, when you first started showing up here, I thought you were just some rich guy slumming it for kicks, but you're really not good at this, are you? Alexander blinked, taken aback. Good at what? Connecting with people. Being normal, Emily said, but there was no malice in her tone. It's kind of endearing, actually. Alexander felt his face heat up again. I'm that transparent, huh? Like glass, Emily grinned. Then her expression turned serious. Look, Alexander, I appreciate your honesty, but I need you to understand something. I'm a single mom working a minimum wage job. I don't have time for games or complicated relationships. My daughter comes first, always. Alexander nodded, feeling a strange mix of admiration and something else he couldn't quite identify. I understand, and I respect that, Emily. I'm not trying to complicate your life. I enjoy your company. Is it okay if I keep coming around? Just as a friend? Emily regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, friends, but no more lurking in corners pretending to like our coffee. It's kind of creepy. Alexander laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even him. Deal. No more lurking. As Emily's break ended and she headed back inside, Alexander found himself smiling. It wasn't the triumphant smirk he usually wore after a successful business deal. This was something different, something warmer. The next few days saw a shift in their interactions. Alexander stopped pretending and started engaging in real conversations with Emily during her breaks. He learned about her struggles as a single mother, her dreams of returning to school, and the everyday challenges she faced. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench outside the restaurant, Emily asked, "So, what about you, Alexander? What's your story?" Alexander hesitated. He'd been avoiding talking about himself, partly to maintain his cover, but also because he was starting to realize how hollow his life sounded compared to Emily's. I grew up poor," he began, surprising himself with his honesty. "My parents worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. I promised myself I'd never live like that again, so I worked hard, got scholarships, climbed the corporate ladder." Emily nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I thought once I had money and success, I'd be happy. But lately, I've been wondering if I've been chasing the wrong things," Alexander admitted, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Emily's hand found his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "It's never too late to change course, you know." The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through Alexander. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw beyond her simple appearance. He saw her strength, her kindness, her resilience, and something inside him shifted. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander found himself looking forward to these moments with Emily more than any board meeting or business deal. He started to see the world through her eyes, the joy she found in simple things, the love she had for her daughter, the hope she held on to despite her circumstances. One evening, as he was leaving McBurger's, he saw Emily struggling with some heavy boxes in the storage room. Without thinking, he rolled up his sleeves and started helping her. "Thanks," Emily said, wiping sweat from her brow. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Alexander replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. As they worked side by side, Alexander felt a sense of camaraderie he'd never experienced before. Here, in this small, greasy storage room, he wasn't a powerful CEO. He was just a man helping a friend. Later that night, as Alexander sat in his luxurious penthouse, he found himself staring at his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him seemed different somehow. The sharp edges of his ambition had softened, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. He thought about the bet that had started all this, the callous way he'd approached Emily at first. Shame washed over him. How could he have been so blind, so arrogant? For the first time in years, Alexander Blackwood questioned the path he'd chosen. The empire he'd built, the wealth he'd accumulated, what did it all mean if he couldn't connect with people on a genuine level? As he turned away from the window, his eyes fell on a framed magazine cover featuring his own smirking face. "The man who has everything," the headline proclaimed. Alexander scoffed. Everything? He was beginning to realize he had barely scratched the surface of what truly mattered in life. With a sudden burst of energy, he grabbed his phone and dialed Marcus's number. "Alex, it's late. What's going on?" Marcus's voice was groggy with sleep. "The bet's off, Marcus," Alexander said firmly. "What? Why? Don't tell me you're giving up." Marcus chuckled. Alexander's voice was steel. "I'm not giving up. I'm growing up. This whole thing, it's wrong. Emily's not a prize to be won. She's a person, a remarkable one, and I won't be part of treating her like a game piece." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well, well," Marcus finally said, his voice a mix of surprise and something that might have been respect. "Looks like our little wager had some unexpected consequences." "You have no idea," Alexander muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. As he ended the call, he felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. He had a lot to learn, a lot to change, but for the first time in a long time, Alexander Blackwood felt truly alive, and it was all thanks to a chance encounter with a tired waitress who had shown him a glimpse of what really mattered in life. The early morning sun streamed through the windows of Alexander's penthouse as he stood in front of his closet, frowning. For the first time in years, he found himself second-guessing his wardrobe choices. The rows of perfectly tailored suits suddenly seemed excessive, even gaudy. With a sigh, he reached for a simple button-down shirt and a pair of jeans he'd forgotten he owned. As he dressed, he couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Here he was, one of the most powerful men in the tech industry, worrying about looking too fancy for a day at the park. Emily had invited him to join her and Lily for a picnic, and the thought both excited and terrified him. It would be the first time he'd spend significant time with Lily, and he was determined to make a good impression. As he left his building, he opted to take a taxi instead of his Ferrari. The driver gave him a curious look as he slid into the back seat, clearly not used to seeing such a casually dressed passenger from this address. "Golden Gate Park." "Please," Alexander said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. The park was bustling with activity when he arrived. Families sprawled on blankets, children chased each other across the grass, and the air was filled with laughter and the smell of barbecue. Alexander felt out of place, like an alien who had suddenly landed in a world he didn't understand. Then he saw them. Emily was setting up a blanket under a large oak tree, while Lily danced around her, clutching a bright yellow kite. The sight made Alexander's heart skip a beat. "Alexander!" Lily squealed, spotting him first. She ran towards him, her curls bouncing with each step. Emily looked up, a warm smile spreading across her face. "You made it?" she said as he approached. "And you look different." Alexander ran a hand through his hair self-consciously. "Good different, I hope." Emily's smile widened. "Definitely good. You look more relaxed." "It suits you." As they settled onto the blanket, Alexander felt a wave of contentment wash over him. This was so far removed from his usual Sunday activities of conference calls and strategy meetings, yet it felt inexplicably right. Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Alexander, can you help me fly my kite? Mommy says it's too windy for her." Alexander hesitated, glancing at Emily. She nodded encouragingly. Sure, Lily. I'll do my best, though I have to admit, I've never actually flown a kite before." Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. "Never, but you're a grown-up," Emily laughed. "Being a grown-up doesn't mean you know how to do everything, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need to learn new things too." As Alexander fumbled with the kite strings, Lily patiently explained the process to him. Her innocent enthusiasm was infectious, and soon Alexander found himself laughing and running across the grass, the kite soaring behind him. From her spot on the blanket, Emily watched the scene with a mixture of amusement and something deeper, a warmth that spread through her chest. She'd never seen Alexander like this, carefree, joyful, almost childlike in his excitement. As the afternoon wore on, they shared sandwiches and stories. Alexander found himself opening up about his childhood, sharing memories he'd long buried under layers of ambition and success. "I remember my dad taking me to the park on Sundays," he said, his voice soft with nostalgia. "It was the only day he didn't work, and even though we didn't have much, those days felt like the richest of my life." Emily reached out, squeezing his hand gently. "It sounds like you had a wonderful father." Alexander nodded, swallowing past the lump in his throat. "He was. He always said that true wealth wasn't about money, but about the people you surround yourself with. I think I forgot that somewhere along the way." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Lily curled up on the blanket, her head resting on Emily's lap. Alexander helped pack up their things, marveling at how natural it all felt. "Thank you for today," he said, as they walked towards the park exit. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself this much." Emily smiled up at him. "We enjoyed having you with us, didn't we, Lily?" Lily nodded sleepily. "Can Mr. Alexander come to the park with us again next time, Mummy?" Emily glanced at Alexander, a question in her eyes. He felt his heart swell. "I'd love to, if that's okay with your mum." As they said their goodbyes, Alexander felt a strange reluctance to leave. The thought of returning to his empty penthouse, with its stark modernity and silence, suddenly seemed unbearable. On the taxi ride home, Alexander's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He thought about the life he'd built for himself, the endless pursuit of more money, more power, more success. And for what? Today, in the park with Emily and Lily, he'd felt more alive than he had in years. As he entered his penthouse, the contrast was stark. The sleek furniture and state-of-the-art gadgets that had once filled him with pride now seemed cold and impersonal. He wandered from room to room, feeling like a stranger in his own home. In his study, his eyes fell on a framed photo of himself shaking hands with the governor at a charity gala. He remembered that night, the networking, the posturing, the constant calculation of who could be useful to him. It all seemed so hollow now. With a sudden burst of energy, Alexander began to move through his home, making mental notes. The pretentious modern art piece in the living room. It had to go. The home theater he'd never used. Maybe he could donate it to a community center. The guest rooms that had never seen a guest. Perhaps they could be repurposed into something more meaningful. As he worked, a plan began to form in his mind. It was time for a change. Not just in his personal life, but in his professional one as well. Quantum innovations had the power to do so much good in the world, but they'd been focused solely on profit for too long. He thought about Emily, about her dream of becoming a teacher. How many others were out there, full of potential but held back by circumstances? What if his company could make a difference in their lives? The next morning, Alexander strode into the Quantum Innovations headquarters with a new sense of purpose. His employees noticed the change immediately. Gone was the intimidating CEO in his power suit. In his place was a man in a casual button-down and slacks, with a warmth in his eyes that none of them had seen before. "Sarah," he called to his assistant as he passed her desk, "cancel my meetings for the day and get me the files on all our community outreach programs. It's time we made some changes around here." Sarah blinked in surprise but nodded. "Right away, Mr. Blackwood." As Alexander settled behind his desk, he felt a surge of excitement. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to the work ahead. He had no idea where this new path would lead him, but he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. And as he began to sketch out ideas for new initiatives, his mind kept drifting back to the park, to Emily's warm smile and Lily's infectious laughter. He realized with a start that he was no longer thinking about the bet or his reputation. All he wanted was to be worthy of the trust and affection they'd shown him. Alexander Blackwood, the man who once thought he had everything, was finally beginning to understand what truly mattered in life, and he was determined not to let it slip away. The boardroom of Quantum Innovations fell silent as Alexander Blackwood finished his presentation. The faces around the table ranged from shocked to intrigued, with a few showing outright skepticism. Alexander stood confidently at the head of the table, his newly adopted casual attire a stark contrast to the suits surrounding him. "So, let me get this straight," said Victor Reeves, the head of finance, leaning forward with a frown. "You want to allocate a significant portion of our profits to community outreach programs?" Alexander nodded, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Exactly. We have the resources to make a real difference in people's lives. Imagine the impact we could have if we invested in education, job training, and small business support in underserved communities." "But what about our shareholders?" another board member interjected. "They're expecting growth, not charity." Alexander's lips quirked into a small smile. "Who says it can't be both? By investing in these communities, we're not just doing good. We're cultivating future talent, creating goodwill, and opening up new markets. It's not charity, it's smart business with a conscience." As the discussion continued, Alexander found himself thinking of Emily and Lily. He thought of Emily's dream to become a teacher, of Lily's bright eyes full of potential. How many others were out there just needing a chance? "We'll start with a pilot program," Alexander concluded. "If it proves successful, we'll expand. I believe this is not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do for the long-term success of our company." After the meeting, as the board members filed out, still murmuring amongst themselves, Sarah approached Alexander's desk. "Mr. Blackwood, there's someone here to see you. He says he's an old friend." Alexander looked up, surprised to see Marcus standing in the doorway, an unreadable expression on his face. "Marcus," Alexander said, rising to greet him. "This is unexpected." Marcus stepped into the office, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Alexander. "I heard some interesting rumors about changes at Quantum. I had to see for myself." Alexander gestured for Marcus to take a seat. "And what do you think?" Marcus leaned back, studying Alexander intently. "I think you've changed, Alex. The question is it for better or worse?" Alexander met his gaze steadily. "I'd say for the better." "I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in years, Marcus." A small smile played on Marcus's lips. "You know, when I proposed that bet, I never imagined this would be the outcome. I thought you'd charm the girl, win the bet, and go back to being the ruthless CEO we all knew." "Is that disappointment I hear?" Alexander asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus shook his head. "Surprisingly, no. I'm impressed, actually. You've always been a force to be reckoned with." "Alex, but now you might actually change the world." As Marcus left, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd been so focused on his personal transformation that he'd almost forgotten about the bet that started it all. Now, it seemed trivial, a distant memory compared to the path he was now on. Later that evening, Alexander found himself once again in the familiar surroundings of McBurger's. He'd texted Emily earlier, asking if they could talk after her shift. As he waited, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. When Emily emerged from the back, her hair slightly mussed and her uniform showing signs of a long day's work, Alexander's heart skipped a beat. She smiled tiredly as she slid into the booth across from him. "Long day?" he asked, sliding a cup of her favorite tea across the table. Emily nodded gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "You have no idea, but it's sweet of you to wait. What's on your mind, Alexander?" He took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Emily, about my life, my work, what really matters, and I've realized something important." Emily leaned forward, her eyes curious. "Oh, and what's that?" "I want to make a difference. Real, meaningful change. And I want you to be a part of it." Emily's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Alexander's words tumbled out in a rush of excitement. "I'm starting a new initiative at my company. We're going to invest in education and job training programs, and I thought, well, I remembered your dream of becoming a teacher. What if we could make that happen?" Emily's eyes widened. "Alexander, I don't know what to say. It's an incredible offer, but what?" Alexander pressed gently. Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's just, I've been down this road before. People making big promises, talking about changing my life. It never works out." Alexander felt a pang in his chest. He reached across the table, taking Emily's hand in his. "I understand your hesitation, but this isn't just about you, Emily. It's about creating opportunities for people like you all over the city. Your insight, your experience, it would be invaluable in shaping these programs." Emily studied him for a long moment, her expression a mix of hope and wariness. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" Alexander nodded solemnly. "More serious than I've ever been about anything in my life." A small smile began to form on Emily's lips. "All right, Alexander, I'm listening. Tell me more about this grand plan of yours." As they talked, late into the night, Alexander felt a sense of purpose and excitement he'd never experienced before. Here, in this small booth in a fast food restaurant, with the woman who had unwittingly changed his life, he was plotting a revolution. But as Emily shared her ideas and experiences, Alexander was struck by a sobering realization. He still hadn't told her the whole truth about who he was or how they'd initially met. The weight of his secret pressed heavily on him, threatening to overshadow the joy of this moment. As they said their goodbyes, Emily pulling him into a warm hug that made his heart race, Alexander made a silent vow. He would tell her everything, and soon. She deserved the truth, no matter the consequences. Walking home under the starlit sky, Alexander's mind was a whirlwind of emotions and plans. He was standing on the precipice of something truly transformative, both personally and professionally. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he couldn't even begin to anticipate. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Blackwood wasn't afraid of the unknown. With Emily's warmth still lingering in his embrace and the memory of Lily's laughter echoing in his mind, he felt ready to face whatever came next. As he reached his penthouse, he paused at the threshold. The space that had once felt like a symbol of his success now seemed empty, waiting to be filled with something more meaningful than expensive furniture and cold ambition. Tomorrow, he decided, would be the start of a new chapter. For his company, for the community, for Emily and Lily, and for himself. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Alexander knew one thing for certain: he was no longer walking this path alone. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the city as Alexander paced nervously in his living room. Today was the day he had decided to come clean to Emily about everything, his true identity, the initial bet, and how his feelings had evolved. The weight of his secrets had been growing heavier with each passing day, threatening to undermine the genuine connection they had built. He had invited Emily over to his penthouse, a place he had deliberately kept hidden from her until now. As he waited, he found himself straightening picture frames and adjusting cushions, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. The doorbell's chime sent a jolt through him. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to find Emily standing there, her eyes wide as she took in the opulent surroundings. "Alexander," she said, her voice a mix of confusion and awe. "What is this place?" He ushered her in, his heart pounding. "This is my home, Emily. Please, come in. We have a lot to talk about." As Emily stepped into the penthouse, her gaze swept across the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city. "I don't understand," she said slowly, turning to face him. "You said you worked in tech, but this isn't just a tech job, is it?" Alexander shook his head, gesturing for her to sit on the plush sofa. "No, it's not, Emily. I haven't been entirely honest with you. And it's time I told you the whole truth." Over the next hour, Alexander laid bare everything: his position as CEO of Quantum Innovations, the bet that had initially brought him to McBurger's, and how his time with her and Lily had transformed his perspective on life and success. Emily listened in stunned silence, her expressions shifting from shock to hurt to anger. When Alexander finally finished, the silence that fell between them was deafening. "Say something." "Please," Alexander pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "I don't even know where to begin, Alexander. Or should I call you Mr. Blackwood?" Her voice was sharp with sarcasm. "Do you have any idea how this makes me feel? Like some sort of an project? A bet to be won?" "Emily, please," Alexander started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "No, you've done enough talking. Now it's my turn." She turned to face him. her eyes blazing. "I trusted you, Alexander. I let you into my life, into my daughter's life, and all this time, it was based on a lie." Alexander felt his heart sinking. "It started that way, yes. But Emily, you have to believe me when I say that my feelings for you, for Lily, they're real. They're the most real thing in my life." Emily shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "How can I believe anything you say now? You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, Alexander. You could have told me at any time, but you chose to keep playing this game." "It wasn't a game," Alexander insisted, taking a step toward her. "Yes, it started as a misguided bet, but it became so much more. You've changed me, Emily. You've shown me what really matters in life." Emily's laugh was bitter. "And what's that?" "Slumming it with the working class for a few weeks, getting a taste of how the other half lives before returning to your ivory tower." Her words stung, but Alexander knew he deserved them. "That's not fair, Emily. You know that's not what this is about. The changes I'm making at Quantum, the community programs, they're all because of you, because of what I've learned from you." Emily's anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by a deep weariness. "I don't know what to think anymore, Alexander. I need time. Space to process all of this." Alexander nodded, his heart heavy. "I understand, but please, Emily, don't shut me out completely. Give me a chance to prove that my feelings, my intentions are genuine." Emily moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "I can't make any promises right now, Alexander. I need to think about what's best for me and for Lily." As the door closed behind her, Alexander sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. He had known this conversation would be difficult, but the reality of it was far more painful than he had imagined. Over the next few days, Alexander threw himself into his work, pushing forward with the community initiatives despite the hollow ache in his chest. He respected Emily's need for space, but every moment without her felt like an eternity. It was during a meeting with his team about the new education program that an idea struck him. He excused himself and quickly made his way to his office, picking up the phone with trembling hands. "Sarah," he said to his assistant, "I need you to set up a meeting with the board. And then I want you to reach out to every employee who's been with the company for more than 5 years. We're going to need their help." The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Alexander worked tirelessly, often late into the night, coordinating with his team and reaching out to contacts across the city. He was a man on a mission, driven by a purpose that went beyond business success or personal redemption. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alexander found himself once again standing outside McBurger's. He watched through the window as Emily worked, her movements mechanical, her usual warm smile replaced by a look of quiet determination. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and approached the counter. Emily looked up, surprise and wariness flickering across her face. "Alexander," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I know you asked for space," he said softly, "and I've respected that, but I need you to come with me. There's something I want to show you." Emily hesitated, glancing at her manager who nodded his approval. "All right," she said finally, "but this better be good." As they stepped outside, Emily's eyes widened at the sight of a sleek black car waiting for them. "Alexander, what is this about?" He opened the door for her, a mix of nervousness and excitement in his eyes. "Do you trust me enough for one more leap of faith?" Emily studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly and sliding into the car. As they drove through the city, Alexander's heart raced with anticipation. Everything hinged on what was about to happen. They pulled up in front of a large, newly renovated building. A banner hung across the front, reading Quantum Futures, Community Education and Training Center. Emily turned to Alexander, confusion evident on her face. "What is this?" Alexander took her hand, leading her towards the entrance. "This, Emily, is the future, and I hope, if you'll let me, it's our future too." As they stepped inside, Emily gasped. The lobby was filled with people, employees from Quantum Innovations, community members, and at the center of it all, a group of children gathered around none other than Lily, who was beaming with excitement. "Mommy," Lily cried, running towards them. "Look what Mr. Alexander did. It's a school and a playground and a computer lab all in one. Emily looked around in awe, taking in the state-of-the-art facilities and the eager faces of both children and adults. "Alexander," she breathed, "what is all this?" Alexander smiled softly. "This is my apology, my promise, and my hope all rolled into one. It's a center for education, job training, and community support. And," he added, his voice filled with emotion, "if you'll have me, I'd like you to help run it. As a teacher, a mentor, whatever role you want." Emily's eyes filled with tears, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "I don't know what to say." Alexander gently cupped her face in his hands. "Say you'll give us another chance. Say you believe that people can change, that I've changed. Say you'll help me make a real difference in this community, in our community." For a moment that felt like an eternity, Emily was silent. Then, slowly, a smile began to spread across her face. "You really have changed, haven't you?" she said softly. Alexander nodded, his heart in his eyes. "Because of you, Emily. You showed me what really matters in life." As Lily tugged on both their hands, eager to show them around, Emily looked up at Alexander. "We have a lot to talk about still," she said, "but I think I'd like to be a part of this, of all of this." Alexander felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. As they followed Lily through the center, hand in hand, he knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, a trust to rebuild, and a community to serve. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Blackwood was exactly where he wanted to be, with exactly the people he wanted to be with. The bet that had started it all was long forgotten. In its place was something far more valuable, a chance at real love, meaningful work, and a future filled with purpose. And as he looked at Emily and Lily, laughing and exploring their new world together, Alexander knew that he had finally found his true fortune. The weeks following the opening of the Quantum Futures Center were a whirlwind of activity and emotion for Alexander and Emily. While the initial shock of Alexander's revelation had worn off, they were now navigating the delicate process of rebuilding trust and redefining their relationship. Emily had agreed to take on a role at the center, focusing on developing educational programs for both children and adults. Her experience as a single mother struggling to make ends meet provided invaluable insight into the real needs of the community they were serving. One crisp autumn morning, Alexander arrived at the center to find Emily deep in conversation with a group of single mothers, all eagerly discussing their hopes for the future. "And you're saying we can take classes here while our kids are in the daycare program?" one woman asked, her eyes wide with hope. Emily nodded, her face alight with enthusiasm. "Absolutely. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to pursue your education and career goals." As the women left, chattering excitedly amongst themselves, Emily turned to see Alexander watching her with a soft smile. "What?" she asked, a hint of self-consciousness in her voice. Alexander shook his head, still smiling. "Nothing. It's just, you're amazing. You know that. The way you connect with people, understand their needs. I could never do what you do." Emily's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. "Well, that's why we make a good team, isn't it? You have the resources and the big picture vision, and I have the on-the-ground experience." The word team hung in the air between them, loaded with potential and unspoken emotions. They had been taking things slow, focusing on the work at the center and rebuilding their friendship. But there was an undeniable tension, a spark that neither could ignore. "Speaking of teams," Alexander said, clearing his throat, "I was wondering if you and Lily might like to join me for dinner tonight. There's something I'd like to discuss with you both." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Oh, sounds serious." Alexander chuckled nervously. "Not serious in a bad way, I promise. Just important." That evening, Alexander found himself pacing nervously in his kitchen. He had decided to cook dinner himself, rather than ordering in chairs, wanting to show Emily and Lily a more personal side of himself. The pasta sauce simmered on the stove, filling the apartment with a warm, inviting aroma. The doorbell rang, and Alexander took a deep breath before answering. Emily stood there, looking beautiful in a simple sundress, with Lily bouncing excitedly beside her. "Mr. Alexander!" Lily cried, launching herself at him for a hug. Mommy said you're cooking for us. Can I help? Alexander laughed, lifting Lily into his arms. Of course you can, Chef Lily. I need an expert taste tester. As they settled into the kitchen, with Lily perched on a stool supervising the sauce stirring, Emily leaned against the counter, watching them with a soft expression. So, she said, what's this important thing you wanted to discuss? Alexander turned to face her, his expression serious but warm. Well, it's about the future. Our future, if you're willing. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Alexander. He held up a hand. Please, let me finish. These past few months working together at the center, they've shown me something important. We make a great team, Emily. Not just professionally, but personally too. I've never felt more alive, more purposeful than when I'm with you and Lily. Lily looked up from her sauce tasting, her eyes wide. Are you going to marry Mommy, Mr. Alexander? Emily gasped, but Alexander just smiled gently. Not quite yet, Lily, but I am asking if you and your mom would consider moving in with me. The kitchen fell silent. Emily's eyes were wide with surprise, while Lily looked between the two adults, trying to gauge their reactions. I know it's a big step, Alexander continued, his voice soft, and I know we still have trust to rebuild. But I want to show you both that I'm committed to this, to us. I want to be a part of your daily lives, not just someone you see at work or on special occasions. Emily was quiet for a long moment, her emotions playing across her face. Alexander, I don't know what to say. It's a huge decision. I know, he said, reaching out to take her hand, and I don't expect an answer right away. I want you to think about it. Talk it over with Lily. I just want you to know that my home, my life is open to you both whenever you're ready. Lily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly piped up. Does this mean I'd get a bigger room and maybe a puppy? The tension broke as both adults burst into laughter. Well, Alexander said, winking at Emily, I think those are definitely points we can negotiate. As they sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and warmth. Alexander found himself marveling at how natural it felt, the three of them together like this. It was so far removed from his old life of solitary meals and business dinners, yet it felt more right than anything ever had. After dinner, as Lily dozed on the couch, Emily and Alexander stood by the windows, looking out over the city lights. You've really thought this through, haven't you? Emily said softly. Alexander nodded. I have. I know it won't be easy. We'll have to figure out how to blend our lives, how to parent together. But Emily, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want this. I want us. Emily turned to face him, her eyes searching his. What about your old life? The parties, the galas, the business dinners. Won't you miss all that? Alexander shook his head, a rueful smile on his lips. Honestly, I haven't even thought about any of that. My world is so much richer now, Emily. The only things I care about are right here in this room. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You really have changed, haven't you? Because of you, Alexander said softly, reaching out to cup her cheek. You and Lily. You've shown me what really matters in life. For a moment they stood there, the air between them charged with emotion. Then, slowly, Emily leaned in and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, but filled with promise. As they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Emily whispered, "Ask me again." Alexander's heart raced. Emily, will you and Lily move in with me? Will you give us a chance to be a family? This time, Emily's answer was immediate. Yes, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Yes, we will. From the couch came a sleepy cheer. They turned to see Lily, eyes half open but grinning widely. Does this mean I get my puppy? As they all dissolved into laughter, Alexander felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. The path ahead would not be without its challenges, but he knew that together they could face anything. Later that night, after Emily and Lily had gone home to start planning their move, Alexander stood in his soon-to-be-transformed penthouse. He thought about the man he had been just a few months ago, successful by societal standards, but empty inside. Now, he was on the cusp of a new adventure, one filled with love, purpose, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. As he gazed out at the city lights, Alexander made a silent vow. He would never take this second chance for granted. He would work every day to be worthy of the love and trust Emily and Lily had placed in him, and he would use his resources and influence to continue making a difference in the lives of others, just as Emily and Lily had made a difference in his. The bet that had started it all was now a distant memory, replaced by something far more valuable, a future filled with love, purpose, and the joy of building a life together. As Alexander turned off the lights and headed to bed, he felt a sense of peace and excitement for what tomorrow would bring. The journey of transformation was far from over, but now he had the two best companions he could ever ask for by his side. The sound of laughter echoed through the once quiet halls of Alexander's penthouse. It had been 3 weeks since Emily and Lily had moved in, and the space had transformed from a sleek, impersonal showplace into a warm, lived-in home. Colorful drawings adorned the fridge, stuffed animals peeked out from behind throw pillows, and the scent of home-cooked meals regularly wafted through the air. Alexander stood in the doorway of what used to be his home office, now converted into Lily's bedroom. Emily was helping Lily arrange her ever-growing collection of books on a new bookshelf, both of them giggling over some private joke. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, unable to keep the smile from his face. Lily looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mr. Alexander, come see my library." As he stepped into the room, Alexander marveled at how quickly Lily had adapted to their new living situation. She had taken to calling him Mr. Alexander, despite his insistence that just Alexander was fine. Emily had explained that it was Lily's way of showing respect while still maintaining a sense of familiarity. "Wow, that's quite a collection," Alexander said, genuinely impressed by the variety of books. "You know, I think we might need to build you your own little reading nook soon." Lily's eyes widened with delight. "Really? Can it be a treehouse?" "Inside?" Emily laughed, ruffling Lily's hair. "Let's not get carried away, sweetie. Remember, we're guests here." Alexander felt a twinge in his chest at Emily's words. "You're not guests," he said softly. "This is your home now, too, both of you." Emily met his gaze, her expression a mix of gratitude and lingering uncertainty. They were still navigating this new dynamic, trying to find the right balance between family and whatever it was they were becoming to each other. Later that evening, after Lily had been tucked into bed, Alexander and Emily sat on the balcony, enjoying the cool night air and the glittering city lights. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alexander asked, noticing Emily's pensive expression. She sighed, turning to face him. "I was just thinking about how much our lives have changed in such a short time. It's all so surreal sometimes." Alexander nodded, understanding completely. "I know what you mean. There are moments when I wake up and can't believe this is my life now, but then I hear Lily's laughter or see your smile, and I know I've never been happier." Emily reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I'm happy too, Alexander. Happier than I've been in a long time, but, he prompted gently. "But I'm also scared," she admitted. "This all feels so perfect, like a dream, and I can't help but worry that one day I'll wake up and it'll all be gone." Alexander squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I understand, Emily, and I know I have a lot to make up for, given how we started. But I promise you, this is real. My feelings for you and Lily are real, and I'm not going anywhere." Emily leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I believe you. It's just, old habits die hard, I guess. I've spent so long being self-reliant. It's hard to let someone else in completely. We'll take it one day at a time," Alexander said softly. "There's no rush. We have all the time in the world to figure this out together." As they sat there, wrapped in comfortable silence, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing slightly. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, noticing his expression. Alexander hesitated for a moment before answering. It's Marcus. He wants to meet for lunch tomorrow." Emily stiffened slightly at the mention of Marcus's name. She knew he was the one who had proposed the initial bet that had brought Alexander into her life. While she had forgiven Alexander, her feelings toward Marcus were still complicated. Are you going to go? She asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Alexander turned to face her fully. I don't have to. If it makes you uncomfortable, I can decline. Emily shook her head. No, it's okay. He's still your friend, and I guess in a roundabout way we owe him for bringing us together. Alexander smiled, touched by her understanding. Thank you, but you know, you're welcome to join us if you'd like. No more secrets, remember? Emily considered for a moment before nodding. You know what? I think I will. It's about time I met the man behind the infamous bet. The next day, Alexander and Emily walked hand in hand into the upscale restaurant where they were meeting Marcus. As they approached the table, Marcus stood, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Emily. Alexander, he greeted, then turned to Emily with a charming smile. And you must be the famous Emily. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Emily shook his hand, her grip firm. Likewise, Marcus. I've heard a lot about you. As they settled into their seats, there was a moment of awkward silence. Marcus cleared his throat. I have to say I was surprised when Alexander said you'd be joining us, but I'm glad. It gives me a chance to apologize in person. Emily raised an eyebrow. Apologize? Marcus nodded, his usual confident demeanor softening. Yes, for the bet. It was childish and disrespectful, and I'm truly sorry for any pain it may have caused you. Emily studied him for a moment before speaking. Thank you. Marcus, I appreciate your apology, and while I can't say I'm happy about how things started, I am grateful for where we've ended up. Alexander squeezed her hand under the table, a surge of love and pride washing over him. As the meal progressed, the initial tension began to dissipate. Marcus regaled them with stories from his and Alexander's college days, and Emily shared some of her experiences from the community center. Towards the end of the lunch, Marcus leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. You know, Alexander, I've known you for a long time, but I don't think I've ever seen you this happy. Alexander smiled, glancing at Emily. That's because I've never been this happy, Marcus. Emily and Lily, they've changed everything for me. Marcus nodded, raising his glass. Then I propose a toast to new beginnings, unexpected journeys, and the kind of wealth that can't be measured in dollars. As they clinked glasses, Emily felt the last of her reservations melting away. This was her life now, a life filled with love, support, and endless possibilities. Later that night, as Alexander and Emily prepared dinner together in their kitchen, with Lily coloring at the table nearby, Emily was struck by the simple beauty of the moment. You okay? Alexander asked, noticing her pause in chopping vegetables. Emily smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. More than okay. I was just thinking, this is it, isn't it? This is what happily ever after looks like. Alexander set down the spoon he was holding and pulled her into his arms. It is, but it's not an ending, Emily, it's just the beginning. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace with the sounds of Lily's humming in the background, both Alexander and Emily knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their unlikely love story, born from a misguided bet, had blossomed into something beautiful and real, a testament to the transformative power of love, understanding, and second chances. As the seasons changed and autumn gave way to winter, the new family settled into a rhythm of domestic bliss. However, life has a way of throwing curveballs, and their newfound happiness was about to face its first real test. It was a crisp December morning when Alexander received an unexpected call from his assistant, Sarah. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's an urgent matter that requires your immediate attention at the office. Alexander frowned, glancing at Emily, who was helping Lily with her homework at the dining table. He had been making a concerted effort to separate work and home life, but sometimes the demands of running a major corporation couldn't be ignored. I'll be there in an hour, he said, ending the call with a sigh. Emily looked up, concern etching her features. Everything okay? Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emily had come to recognize as a sign of stress. I'm not sure. There's some kind of emergency at work. I have to go in. Lily's face fell. But you promised we'd go ice skating today. I know. Sweetheart, Alexander said, kneeling down to her level. And I'm really sorry. I'll make it up to you, I promise. How about we go tomorrow instead? Lily nodded reluctantly, and Alexander felt a pang of guilt as he saw the disappointment in her eyes. He turned to Emily, who gave him a reassuring smile. "Go," she said softly. "We'll be here when you get back." The scene at Quantum Innovations was one of barely contained chaos. Alexander strode through the corridors, the usual hush that fell over employees at his approach, replaced by urgent whispers and worried glances. Sarah met him at the door of the conference room, her usual composure slipping slightly. "Sir, it's about the new community initiative. There's been a leak." Alexander's blood ran cold. He had been working on a major expansion of their community programs, including significant investments in education and job training across several states. The plans weren't finalized yet, and a premature leak could jeopardize everything. As he entered the room, he was met with a sea of anxious faces. His executive team, legal counsel, and PR representatives all gathered around a large screen, displaying various news articles and social media posts. "How bad is it?" Alexander asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. His head of PR, Jennifer, stepped forward. "It's complicated, sir. The leak itself isn't the main problem, it's the reaction." She gestured to the screen, and Alexander's eyes widened as he took in the headlines, "Tech Giant's Charity, a Tax Dodge in Disguise. Quantum Innovations, Buying Good PR at the Expense of Shareholders." "There's a lot of speculation that this is just a publicity stunt," Jennifer continued. "Some are accusing us of trying to distract from recent layoffs in our overseas divisions. Others are saying it's an elaborate tax evasion scheme." Alexander felt a surge of anger and frustration. Everything he had worked for, the genuine change he was trying to make, was being twisted and misconstrued. "What are our options?" he asked, his mind already racing with potential solutions. The next several hours were a blur of strategy meetings, legal consultations, and crisis management planning. By the time Alexander left the office, the winter sky had long since darkened. He returned home to find the penthouse quiet, Lily already in bed. Emily was waiting up for him, a mug of hot tea in her hands. "Rough day?" she asked softly, taking in his exhausted expression. Alexander nodded, sinking onto the couch beside her. "You could say that." As he explained the situation, Emily listened intently, her brow furrowing with concern. "But this is ridiculous," she said when he finished. "Anyone who's seen the work we're doing at the community center would know this isn't just for show." Alexander smiled wearily. "I know, but perception is everything in the corporate world. If we can't control the narrative, all the good intentions in the world won't matter." Emily was quiet for a moment, then said, "So control it. Show them the real impact of what you're doing. Let them see the faces of the people whose lives are being changed." Alexander looked at her, a spark of inspiration in his eyes. "Emily, you're brilliant. That's exactly what we need to do." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Alexander, with Emily's help, organized an open house at the Quantum Futures Center. They invited journalists, shareholders, and community members to see firsthand the work being done. Emily took charge of coordinating with the families who had benefited from the programs, coaching them on how to share their stories effectively. Alexander was constantly amazed by her natural ability to connect with people, to draw out their experiences in a way that was both authentic and powerful. The day of the open house arrived, and the center was buzzing with energy. As Alexander prepared to address the gathered crowd, he felt a familiar nervousness. But then he felt Emily's hand slip into his, and Lily's small fingers grasp his other hand. Looking down at them, he felt a surge of strength and certainty. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and confident, "I stand before you not just as the CEO of Quantum Innovations, but as a man whose life has been transformed by the very community we seek to serve." He went on to share his personal journey, how meeting Emily and Lily had opened his eyes to the real struggles and resilience of everyday people. He spoke of the responsibility that came with success, the obligation to give back and create opportunities for others. As he spoke, he could see the skepticism in some eyes begin to soften, but it was when Emily stepped forward, Lily by her side, that the real magic happened. Emily shared her own story of being a struggling single mother, of the doors that had opened for her through the Quantum Futures program. She introduced other families who had similar experiences, each one a testament to the real, tangible impact of the initiative. By the end of the day, the mood had shifted dramatically. Journalists who had come looking for a scandal were leaving with stories of hope and redemption. Shareholders who had been concerned about the bottom line were now talking about the long-term benefits of community investment. As the last of the guests departed, Alexander found himself standing with Emily and Lily, looking out over the center that had become the heart of their shared mission. "We did it," Emily said softly, leaning into him. Alexander shook his head, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "No, you did it, both of you. I wouldn't be here. Wouldn't be the person I am today without you." Lily looked up at them, her eyes bright with pride. "Does this mean we can go ice skating now?" Alexander laughed, scooping her up into his arms. "Absolutely, princess. In fact, I think we all deserve a celebration." As they left the center, hand in hand, Alexander felt a profound sense of gratitude. The crisis had been averted, yes, but more than that. It had solidified what he already knew, that with Emily and Lily by his side, there was no challenge he couldn't face, no obstacle he couldn't overcome. The journey ahead would undoubtedly have its ups and downs, but Alexander knew that together they could weather any storm. For in each other they had found not just love, but strength, purpose, and a shared vision for a better future. Spring had arrived in the city, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility. The Quantum Futures Center was thriving, its success having silenced most of the critics and skeptics. Alexander, Emily, and Lily had settled into a comfortable routine, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. One sunny Saturday morning, as Alexander was making pancakes, a skill he'd recently acquired under Lily's exacting tutelage, Emily entered the kitchen with a slightly nervous expression. "Alexander, there's something I need to talk to you about," she said, her voice hesitant. He turned, concern immediately etching his features. "What is it? Is everything okay?" Emily took a deep breath. "I received a letter yesterday. It's from Lily's father." The spatula slipped from Alexander's hand, clattering to the floor. In all their time together, Lily's father had never been more than a vague, unnamed figure from the past. Alexander had always assumed he was completely out of the picture. "What does he want?" Alexander asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Emily sank into a chair at the kitchen island. "He says he's turned his life around. He wants to meet Lily, to be a part of her life." Alexander felt a cold knot of fear form in his stomach. He'd come to think of Lily as his own, even if they hadn't put any official labels on their family unit yet. The thought of someone else coming in, potentially disrupting the life they'd built together, was terrifying. "What do you think about this?" he asked Emily, careful to keep his tone neutral. Emily ran a hand through her hair, a gesture Alexander recognized as a sign of her own anxiety. "I don't know. Part of me wants to protect Lily from any potential hurt or disappointment, but another part of me thinks she has a right to know her biological father, if he's really changed." Alexander nodded slowly, his mind racing. "And what about Lily? Does she know about this yet?" "No," Emily shook her head. "I wanted to talk to you first. We're in this together, Alexander. Your opinion matters to me." The warmth that spread through Alexander's chest at her words helped to ease some of his fear. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means a lot to me." They spent the next hour discussing the situation, weighing the pros and cons, and trying to decide on the best course of action. In the end, they agreed that they needed to be honest with Lily and let her have a say in the decision. That evening, after dinner, they sat Lily down for a family meeting. Alexander marveled at the maturity with which the young girl listened to her mother's explanation, her small face scrunched in concentration. "So, my real dad wants to meet me?" Lily asked once Emily had finished. Emily nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. But it's completely up to you if you want to see him or not. There's no pressure either way." Lily was quiet for a moment, then turned to Alexander. "What do you think, Mr. Alexander?" Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. He knelt down to Lily's level, taking her small hands in his. "Lily, I think that if you want to meet him, that's okay. It doesn't change anything between us. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Lily's eyes welled up with tears, and she threw her arms around Alexander's neck. "You're my dad too, you know," she whispered. Alexander held her tight, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I know, sweetheart. I know." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions as they prepared for Lily's meeting with her biological father. Alexander threw himself into work at the center, trying to distract himself from the gnawing worry that this could change everything. The day of the meeting arrived, crisp and clear. They had agreed to meet in a neutral location, a small cafe near the park where Alexander had first taken Emily and Lily for a picnic. As they approached the cafe, Alexander felt Emily's hand slip into his. He looked down to see her smiling up at him, a mixture of nervousness and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for being here," she said softly. "I don't think I could do this without you." Alexander squeezed her hand. "Jan, there's nowhere else I'd rather be." They entered the cafe, Lily between them, her small hand clutching Alexander's tightly. A man stood up from a corner table, his face a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Emily," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And you must be Lily." What followed was an hour of awkward conversation, tentative smiles, and a palpable tension that even Lily seemed to sense. Alexander sat quietly, offering support with his presence, but allowing Emily and Lily to lead the interaction. As they left the cafe, Alexander couldn't help but notice the conflicting emotions playing across Emily's face. Once they were home, with Lily occupied in her room, he gently broached the subject. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked, pulling Emily close. She sighed, leaning into his embrace. "It's complicated. Seeing him again, watching him with Lily, it brought up a lot of old memories, both good and bad." Alexander nodded, a small knot of fear forming in his stomach. Do you think there's a chance that you might—" Emily pulled back, looking up at him with fierce determination. "No, Alexander, whatever happened in the past, it's in the past. You and Lily are my future, my family." The relief that washed over Alexander was profound. He leaned down, capturing Emily's lips in a tender kiss. When they parted, both were smiling. "You know," Alexander said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "speaking of family, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Emily's eyes widened as Alexander reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He sank down to one knee, his heart pounding. "Emily," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "you and Lily have changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what true love and family really mean. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Emily's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, of course I'll marry you." As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, they heard a small gasp from the doorway. They turned to see Lily standing there, her eyes wide with excitement. "Are you going to be my real dad now, Mr. Alexander?" she asked, hope shining in her eyes. Alexander opened his arms, and Lily ran into them. "I already am your real dad, sweetheart. This just makes it official." As the three of them hugged, laughing and crying together, Alexander marveled at the journey that had brought them to this point, from a misguided bet to a love that had transformed not just his life, but the lives of so many others through their work at the center. He knew that challenges lay ahead, integrating Lily's biological father into their lives, planning a wedding, continuing to grow their community programs. But looking at Emily and Lily, he knew that together, they could face anything. The bet that had started it all was now nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by a love and a purpose far greater than Alexander had ever dreamed possible. As he held his family close, he silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought them into his life, forever changing his definition of true wealth and success. The months following Alexander's proposal were a whirlwind of activity. Between planning the wedding, managing the ever-expanding Quantum Futures program, and navigating the new dynamic with Lily's biological father, their days were fuller than ever. One crisp autumn morning, Alexander found himself standing in front of the full-length mirror in their bedroom, adjusting his tie. Today was a big day, not just for him, but for the entire Quantum Innovations family. Need some help with that?" Emily's voice came from behind him. He turned to see her leaning against the doorframe, a warm smile on her face. Alexander chuckled. "I've been tying my own ties for years, but somehow today, my fingers seem all thumbs." Emily approached, gently batting his hands away and taking over the task. As she worked, Alexander marveled at how natural this felt, this simple, domestic moment amidst the chaos of their lives. "Nervous about the announcement?" Emily asked, smoothing down his collar. Alexander took a deep breath. "A little. It's a big change, for everyone." Today was the day Alexander would officially announce his plan to step down as CEO of Quantum Innovations. He wasn't retiring, far from it. Instead, he was transitioning to a new role as the head of the Quantum Futures Foundation, which would oversee all of the company's philanthropic efforts. "You're doing the right thing," Emily reassured him, placing a soft kiss on his cheek. "The company is in good hands with Sarah taking over as CEO, and you'll be able to focus on the work that really matters to you." Alexander nodded, drawing strength from her confidence. "I just hope the board and the shareholders see it that way." As they made their way to Quantum Innovations headquarters, Lily chattering excitedly in the back seat about her role as a junior spokesperson for the foundation, Alexander reflected on how much had changed in the past year. The company that had once been solely focused on profit and technological advancement was now at the forefront of corporate social responsibility. The Quantum Futures program had expanded beyond their city, with centers opening up across the country, and at the heart of it all was the family he had found in Emily and Lily. The auditorium was packed when they arrived, employees, board members, shareholders, and media all gathered to hear the big announcement. As Alexander took the stage, he felt a moment of déjà vu, remembering the press conference where he had first defended the Quantum Futures program. But this time, instead of anxiety, he felt a sense of purpose and peace. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and clear. "A year ago, I stood before you to talk about a new direction for quantum innovations. Today, I'm here to take that vision even further." He went on to outline his plan, stepping down as CEO to focus on expanding their philanthropic efforts, with Sarah, his longtime assistant, and now COO, taking over the reins of the company. "Some might see this as stepping back," Alexander continued, "but I see it as stepping up to the responsibility we have as successful individuals and corporations to make a real difference in the world." As he spoke, he could see the reactions in the audience, surprise as confusion, and gradually understanding and approval. When he introduced Emily and Lily, inviting them to join him on stage to talk about the impact of the Quantum Futures program, the atmosphere in the room shifted from skeptical to inspired. Emily spoke eloquently about the lives changed through education and opportunity, while Lily, in her endearingly straightforward way, talked about how Mr. Alexander helps people because it's the right thing to do, not because he has to. By the end of the presentation, the room was on its feet, applauding not just the business decision, but the vision of a corporation that could be both profitable and profoundly impactful. As they left the stage, Alexander was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and reporters, but his focus was solely on Emily and Lily, who were beaming with pride. "You did it," Emily said, squeezing his hand. "You're changing the world, one step at a time." Later that evening, as they celebrated at home with a quiet family dinner, Alexander found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The bet that had seemed so important at the time now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the love and purpose he had found. "Penny for your thoughts?" Emily asked, noticing his contemplative mood. Alexander smiled, reaching out to take her hand. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now, compared to a year ago. How much fuller, how much more meaningful." Lily, who had been coloring at the table, looked up. "Is it because of us, Mr. Alexander?" He chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "It's absolutely because of you two. You've taught me what really matters in life." As they cleared the table together, laughing and talking about their plans for the foundation, Alexander felt a profound sense of contentment. The path ahead was not without its challenges, There was still so much work to be done, so many lives to touch. But with Emily and Lily by his side, he felt ready for anything. That night, as he lay in bed with Emily curled up beside him, Alexander thought about the wedding that was just a few weeks away. It wasn't going to be the lavish, high society affair that he might have once envisioned. Instead, they had decided on a small, intimate ceremony at the Quantum Futures Center, surrounded by the people whose lives they had touched. "Kate, are you happy?" Emily's sleepy voice broke into his thoughts. Alexander tightened his arm around her, placing a soft kiss on her forehead. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he replied. As he drifted off to sleep, Alexander's last conscious thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought Emily and Lily into his life, for the chance to redefine success on his own terms, and for the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. The journey that had started with a misguided bet had led him to a life richer than he could have ever imagined. And as he stood on the brink of this new chapter, Alexander Blackwood knew that the best was yet to come. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn morning. The Quantum Futures Center had been transformed for the occasion, its usually bustling halls now decorated with simple yet elegant floral arrangements and twinkling lights. Alexander stood in what was normally his office, adjusting his cufflinks and trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. A knock on the door drew his attention, and he turned to see Marcus entering, a warm smile on his face. "Ready for the big moment?" Marcus asked, clapping Alexander on the shoulder. Alexander took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." "It's funny, isn't it? A year ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Now, I'm starting a whole new life, and I've never been more certain of anything." Marcus nodded, his expression turning serious. "You know, when I proposed that bet, I never imagined it would lead to this. I thought maybe you'd learn a lesson about humility, but this..." He gestured around them. "This is beyond anything I could have anticipated." Alexander smiled, remembering the night that had set everything in motion. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? That bet, it was the best mistake I ever made. As they made their way to the main hall, Alexander was struck by the sight before him. The space was filled with a diverse group of people, employees from Quantum Innovations, families who had benefited from the Quantum Futures program, and close friends who had supported them through this journey. At the back of the room, he spotted Lily, looking adorable in her flower girl dress, chatting animatedly with her biological father. The man's presence at the wedding had been a point of discussion, but in the end, they had all agreed it was an important step in building their unconventional but loving family unit. The soft strains of music began, and Alexander took his place at the front of the room. As the doors opened and Emily appeared, radiant in a simple white dress, Alexander felt his breath catch in his throat. Emily's walk down the aisle was accompanied not by her father, but by a group of children from the Quantum Futures program, each holding a single flower. It was a testament to the family they had built, not just with each other, but with the community they served. As Emily reached him, taking his hands in hers, Alexander felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. The officiant began the ceremony, but Alexander barely heard the words. Lost in Emily's eyes and the promise of the future they were building together. "I, Alexander, take you, Emily, to be my wife," he began, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to stand by you in times of joy and hardship, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to work every day to be worthy of the love and trust you've given me." Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she spoke her vows. Emily, take you, Alexander, to be my husband. I promise to be your partner in all things, to cherish the family we've built, and to continue growing and learning with you. You've shown me that it's never too late for second chances and new beginnings." As they exchanged rings, Lily stepped forward, beaming with pride. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant announced, "and officially a family." The room erupted in cheers as Alexander and Emily shared their first kiss as a married couple. Lily threw her arms around both of them, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the three of them, a family born from an unexpected journey. The reception that followed was a joyous celebration, filled with laughter, tears, and heartfelt toasts. Alexander watched in amazement as people from all walks of life, corporate executives, community members, and everything in between, mingled and connected, united by the spirit of hope and change that had brought them all together. As the evening wound down, Alexander found himself on the balcony, taking a moment to absorb it all. Emily joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Penny for your thoughts, Mr. Blackwood," she asked, a teasing lilt to her voice. Alexander chuckled, pulling her close. "Just thinking about how far we've come, Mrs. Blackwood. A year ago, I thought I had everything. Now I realize I had nothing that really mattered." Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, and now, Alexander said softly, "I have everything. A family, a purpose, a chance to make a real difference in the world, and it's all because of you and Lily." From inside, they heard Lily calling for them. "Mom, Dad, it's time for the dance." Alexander's heart swelled at being called Dad. It was a title he had earned, not through biology, but through love and commitment. As they made their way back inside, hand in hand, Alexander reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From a cynical CEO focused only on the bottom line, to a man dedicated to changing lives and building a legacy of compassion and opportunity. The bet that had started it all was now nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by a love story that had not only transformed his life, but had rippled out to touch countless others. As he took Emily in his arms for their first dance, with Lily twirling happily beside them, Alexander knew that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. The music swelled, and as they moved together, surrounded by the warmth and love of their unconventional family, Alexander whispered, "Thank you for giving me a real chance at happiness." Emily smiled up at him, her eyes shining with love and promise. "Thank you for showing me that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations." As the night drew to a close, Alexander, Emily, and Lily stood together, looking out over the city lights. The Quantum Futures Center stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of second chances and the transformative nature of love. Alexander knew that challenges lay ahead. There would be obstacles to overcome, new horizons to explore, and countless lives yet to touch. But with Emily and Lily by his side, and the strength of their extended family, both personal and professional, he felt ready to face whatever the future might bring. The bet that had once seemed so important had set in motion a chain of events that had redefined success, love, and purpose. As Alexander held his family close, he silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought them together, knowing that in losing a bet, he had won the greatest prize of all, a life filled with love, meaning, and the joy of making a difference in the world. And so, as one chapter of their story came to a close, another began, full of promise, purpose, and the endless possibilities that come when one opens their heart to love and their mind to change.